House stands adjourned until 6:30 p.m. on Monday, January 10th, 2022.
Man, that is first of all, excellent choice of the music. That was fantastic. But that is just such an amazing image, right? So last year we did a live stream on the Iraq War turning 18 in 2021, officially old enough to fight in Iraq. And of course, that gentleman there, who all of those good liberal Democrats were lining up to shake his hand and and embrace him, literally. Who was that nice old gent? Who's that guy?
I think what Strom says rings true. It's all a big club, and we sure ain't in it. But I decided to title the video that it was Pelosi hugging Dick Cheney, in case people weren't sure, who that old bald white guy is, because that doesn't necessarily narrow it down. But it is about as evil as it can get. And I don't even know why optically she would do it, unless it just kind of to taunt us, like the same way she's taunting us, with saying that you should be able to own his stock, even if there's a conflict of interest in Congress.
Maybe she got excited and thought that was Christian Bale because she loved the movie Mice.
He's so method that even when the movie's over, it takes time to get out of character.
And then hangs out with Dick Cheney's actual daughter.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. No, I would say that Nancy isn't worried too much about optics right now. Judging by the pattern, right? I mean, like certainly those stock decisions. I don't think that she was sweating a lot about how that was going to be publicly perceived, before she started to do it. Like, in a weird way, it actually reminds me of the second Bush administration when they got super duper unpopular, and there was this real energy running through those last few years. Like, fuck it, whatever. Like, nobody's gonna like us, whatever we do. We're just gonna do stuff.
Yeah, it's that like badass boss energy that she's got. She's like, I'm 94.
Yeah, she's on her way out. She knows the Democrats are going to get creamed in the midterms, and either she just doesn't give a shit, or she just doesn't think there's anything they can do to stop it, or maybe a little from column A and a little from column B, but one way or the other, she's not worried about it. I mean, yeah. I mean, who's she pandering to, hugging Dick Cheney, right? What's the sector of the electorate that loves Dick Cheney? I mean, like that's. I mean, if anybody who's noticed what's gone on for the last several years of American politics, the Republican base has largely become a cult of Donald Trump, right? I mean that's like rhetorically at least. Everybody in the Republican Party feels the need to ape what he says and to do their weird imitations of him. Everybody, right? Like Ted Cruz, who Donald Trump literally said he insulted his wife several times in the primaries. He said on the day that he clinched the Republican nomination that Ted Cruz's dad was involved in the JFK assassination. Ted Cruz, is like constantly tries to prove how he's a Donald Trump Republican. Lindsey Graham, who Trump literally held up his phone at a rally and read off Lindsey Graham's phone number. That's the thing that happened to burn him. Lindsey Graham, does the same thing, and this is how you get, I was talking about this on the Collins show last night. This is how you get people like Charlie Kirk, who were just straight down the line Tea Party guys, and they haven't actually changed any of their policy positions, but like they say they're populists now, and they're conservative populists like Trump, and at least part of what that means, I mean, again, much like the economic populism, is kind of all bullshit. Like Trump doubled the rate of drone strikes in Yemen, but like rhetorically, a big part of what it means is that they're rejecting like the neocons who ran the Republican Party before, that putting America first, all that stuff, right? I mean, that was all about, again, at least rhetorically, going into this more isolationist kind of posture. So those people, there's not a lot of love for Dick Cheney there. I don't see a lot of like Republicans going around proclaiming their love for Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld in the Iraq War, in Republican primaries, to appeal to those voters. So it's not that. I mean, is it that like that many grassroots Democrats love Dick Cheney now? I mean, maybe that'd be an incredibly depressing thought, but I don't really think so, right? I think I think just about like, I mean, any Democratic voter who has a memory that goes back to before 2008, certainly, like remembers how much of their political identity was about hating this guy. Like there was like constant jokes about how like the Darth Vader theme, the Stormtrooper March, whatever, would go when he passed by. He was widely blamed for the Iraq War because the thinking was that George W. Bush was like, right above the level of like chasing a laser pointer beam around the floor, right? I mean, like that's like, he wasn't originating a lot of ideas, for what the Bush administration should do, so he was widely blamed for that. And, Democrats hated him for it. Correctly, as you should. You should hate Dick Cheney for this. I mean, this is like, he worked so hard to make sure the United States invaded Iraq, which like, when I was doing that Rumsfeld obit for Jacobin, over, my brother was in town, over the holidays. He, I told him I'd just read some other article for Jacobin, and did, he was joking about how, like the Ben Burgis article generator, right? What is it, right? Because it's either nationalized fill in the blank or such and such person who just died was actually horrible. But like, so look this up for the Rumsfeld obit, and just between the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the time when, the year that Rumsfeld stepped down as Secretary of Defense, 2006, there, like, according to this super prestigious medical journal, did study, The Lancet, there were 600,000 and change extra deaths in Iraq beyond who would be, how many people would have been expected to die, in that time period. So, I mean, like, if that's not evil, I don't know what is. And man, they're just like lining up to like, oh my God, this, you see, it's Dick Cheney, it's like he's getting out of the limo with the red carpet.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the funny thing is, right, is that Dick Cheney was always kind of like the evil guy behind the scenes to prop up the affable Bush, which is like, in a disgusting way, has even worked to this day, right? And that, like, when people yearn for Bush, they're not really yearning maybe for any of his policies, but they're yearning for like his, like, Joe Schmo persona. But what's funny is that he was always supposed to be like the evil guy behind the scenes, and yet like she still has no qualms about being seen with him. Like, it's one thing to play at this party unity with Bush, but this, it's not even the charade of party unity with Cheney is completely meaningless, as you said. So it must be just about a personal love for the man over any kind of political gamesmanship.
I think it's a bit of what people call West Wing brain. Like they're obsessed with the idea of like order and like who these people are like celebrities to them. Doesn't matter he played for the other team. Dude was vice president, so let's get a selfie with him.
Yeah, right. At the very, very least, right? Like, let's accept for the sake of argument that Nancy Pelosi doesn't love Dick Cheney, although God knows what's going on in her head. But like, at the very least, right? Like, it's incredible level of indifference to what to what Cheney did, right? That it's like, I mean, it's like doing the equivalent of like, I don't know. I mean, like if I were, like you're on like a panel with somebody and like you disagree on the panel, but then like you go get dinner together or something like that, right? Like it's like the equivalent of that, except the analog for like having a disagreement on a panel on a talk show is you killed 600,000 people in Iraq.
Well, you and Charlie Kirk are like pals, right? Like you're
Yeah,
always
yeah.
you're like, yo, me and Charlie, we're at the sports bar, come join us, we're laughing about the last debate.
Yeah, totally. It is funny you mentioned that. Last time I looked, not that very long ago, so maybe this has changed, but if you go to the TPUSA YouTube channel, and they still have the playlist up, the debate night with Charlie Kirk. That was the show, that I was on. And I was episode 3, and that was aired in mid-October. That does not seem to have been in episode 4. Make of that what you will.
I'm going to get my tinfoil hat. You canceled the series.
Yeah, I mean,
well, who knows?
I don't know that it was just me, but I do think it's reasonable to suspect that that he or the people around him started to get the sense that this was not going well for him.
He was owned with facts and logic.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we clip this little conversation, that's definitely what we're going to call it. But yeah, that's no, not a friendly relationship there. Or any. I mean, I think I exchanged about 4 sentences with him outside of the debate. But like there are people who, but like whatever. I mean, I have friends who are libertarians or whatever. Like it's not like I've never had a political argument with somebody and then gone to drink with them. But like, I don't know. I mean, maybe my standards are just too high, but like, I can be friends with people I disagree with about a lot of things, but I don't know that I could be friends with the mastermind of a war that killed 600,000 people in the first 3 years, created millions of refugees, created a cycle of spiraling bloodshed that is continuing to have bad effects now. In helping to destabilize the entire region, and lovely results like the civil war in Syria. From that, the rise of ISIS. Not that you can lay all of that to the door, but you can lay a lot of it to the door. Not to even mention, the fact that he was championing things in the U.S. Like the Patriot Act and mass surveillance,
fracking,
certainly, yeah. And I mean, yeah, this is the guy who was the he was the CEO of Halliburton, and I mean, like literally, he did tons of business with Saddam Hussein, and then was part of the first Bush administration when they were destroying that country in the first Gulf War, and then did a lot of business rebuilding what he just destroyed, in between then and the second Bush administration when he mastermind destroyed it again. Not to even mention indefinite detention, not to even mention the policies, the support for black sites around the world, where the CIA was torturing people directly or engaged in extraordinary rendition to kind of club somebody over the head in a Western capital and stick a bag over their head and put them on a plane to some place like Egypt to be interrogated there, and interrogated in such a manner that you're probably going to admit to stuff whether you did it or not. It's like I don't know, man. I mean, like I can be friends with somebody and I can be like, man, that's kind of a fucked up joke that he just told. I don't know if I don't know if I like that. Whatever, it's fine. He's my friend. I'm not going to make a big deal about that. Like I could be friends with somebody.
I'm sorry I said that, Ben.
All right. Yeah, I was definitely subtweeting you just now. I could be friends with somebody who it's like, they I don't know. I mean, I've heard him have these like huge arguments with his girlfriend. I think he's kind of an asshole about it, right? And whatever. I could see past it, and it's like all right, we can still be friends. I could be friends with somebody who has economic views I really don't like. I kind of think all that stuff I just listed off, that might be beyond the point where I could continue to be buddy with that person.
It makes me think of that Onion article that's like area aunt casually advocates genocide on Facebook. I think like if your aunt or your uncle, is on Facebook posting, something ridiculous, I think you could still go to Thanksgiving dinner and treat them cordially. But if your aunt was actually the person who was, ordering the drone strikes in Syria or whatever it is, maybe the animus, and the thing is, it's completely reversed for Pelosi, where it's like actually no matter what the person did, it is the fact that they had power in general. It's the worship of power that makes them okay, or even laudable in her book. So it's actually the complete inverse of the principle I just described.
No, totally right, because that's what that's what makes you. I mean, yeah, that's it's very true too. He's also not her aunt. But I mean, yeah, like also.
But like Dick Cheney did help end gay marriage, and did help allow gay marriage to happen in Maryland. So the libs are love him for that. I will say, like, that's a good thing he did. Like,
Sure.
Terrible people can do good things. I'm sure. Yeah. Kissinger has been nice to his dogs.
Sure. I don't know. Kissinger. I wouldn't be too
okay. Maybe not.
That.
But,
I think it's possible there's some dead dogs in Kissinger's basement. But
true. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No. It's Hitler, right? Famously, liked his dog a lot, right? The
famous dog lover Hitler.
Yeah, that's what he's best known for, is my understanding. Is that right? Just like Dick Cheney's greatest impact on the world was supporting the legalization of same-sex marriage in Maryland. That was the main thing. Yeah, I mean, I would also point out that that like Dick Cheney was the running mate on a ticket in 2004, where they were running for re-election, where Karl Rove's, like his, one of the big wedge issues that he was using, to mobilize base, vote for him against John Kerry, and they tried to do a lot of, Kerry is soft on, on Muslims, and that, if he's elected, the terrorists will kill us in our sleep or whatever. But like, some of that might have rang a little bit hollow, given that Kerry like supported the Iraq War and et cetera. But like, one of the big themes of the 2004 Bush Cheney campaign was, hey, you don't want to see boys kissing, do you? I mean, like that's kind of crazy to look back on it, but like there were many states where, as a strategy to get evangelicals and conservative Catholics to the polls, they were putting measures on the ballot to ban gay marriage, or even redundantly double or triple ban it in places where there were already a couple things in the state constitution saying, that you couldn't have gay marriage. So, I mean, it's nice that Dick Cheney disagreed with that. I don't think he disagreed very hard when they're plotting strategy for the 2004 election.
And I mean, also his daughter lived in Maryland, so like, it's okay for her, but not for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm sure he sincerely supports, same-sex marriage rights. I mean, it's not like Dick Cheney like believes that like Jesus doesn't want same-sex marriage. I mean, he doesn't give a shit. Why would he, right? Like he and so I'm sure he has a genuine mild preference, for marriage equality. But he was certainly willing to roll along with it's another good super chat from Strom. The Henry Kissinger authorized biographical documentary is my all-time favorite Goblin movie. but he was certainly more than willing to roll along with that as a 2004 election strategy. In fact, this is, and so certainly Dick Cheney cared more about being reelected as vice president and continuing the Bush foreign policy and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, continuing to torture people, et cetera, than he cared about same-sex marriage rights. But I think there's actually also like a bigger point here, and maybe this is actually going to be a good transition. We're going to bring Scott on in just a second, and I should say, Jake, you want to do your labor segment after Scott? Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, cool. Yeah, we'll do it. Yeah, we'll do it in between Scott and the philosophy segment at the end. So I think that one of the points that Scott Horton made, I should back up and say, Scott Horton, who we're about to talk to from antiwar.com, what it did at the end of last year, debated Bill Kristol, who wasn't vice president like Dick Cheney, but he was certainly one of the intellectual architects of the neoconservative movement, and certainly one of the loudest voices pushing for exactly the kind of policies that the Bush-Cheney administration adopted. And the points that he makes, in a clip that we're not going to watch right now, but we'll watch while Scott's on, is that in many, many ways, right? I mean, like in the last few years, under Trump and just after, when everybody still basically wants to talk about Trump because, he's everybody sort of knew what the script was, when they're talking about Trump. A lot of people like Bill Kristol, like the sort of handful of never Trump Republicans who still exist, who all write for the New York Times or, have, or have cable news commentator jobs, made a big deal about being, like sort of disgusted by the incivility and the bigotries of various kinds of the Trump people. And it's like, okay, again, maybe some of that is like mildly sincere, that they have they're like cosmopolitan people who don't necessarily share all of his prejudices and have a mild preference to not see them. But like the Bush administration relentlessly encouraged exactly the kind of people who become most hardcore MAGA people later, that this sort of like baying dogs of right-wing talk radio, certainly, wildly encouraged, paranoia and fear about Muslims. And yeah, I mean, even stuff that seems a little bit dated now, like opposition to same-sex marriage, they were all for it, right? So, I mean, it's like, yeah, maybe all else being equal, they don't like this stuff, but they are sure as hell willing to use it when it serves their interests. All right, guys, final thoughts before we bring on Scott?
Dick Cheney for the guillotine. That's all I got.
Satire, humor.
Yes.
Yeah, I love when Andy makes jokes.
Not actionable.
No, yeah.
He's always saying silly stuff.
You should see me on my other show. Man, I say horrible things.
Yeah, one of the most sarcastic guys around.
Yeah. All right, guys. I'll see you right after, and we'll do Jake's labor segment. But right now, let's bring on Scott Horton.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So this is something I was excited about to have you on. I should say that Dave Smith put me in touch with you like a year ago or something, and it kind of fell through the cracks. Entirely my fault. Like I'll get stuff to read or look at, and it'll get lost in the pile. But
I understand.
then I saw. Yeah, sure. But then I remembered that when late last year you debated Bill Kristol. So set this up for us a little bit. Who is this guy?
Well, he's Irving Kristol's son. So that means actually that in a way unique among the neoconservatives, he was actually never a Trotskyite or even, I don't think, a Democrat. I think his father had already moved to the right before, Bill Kristol was, came of age. And so I think he adopted his father's politics. So he's the second generation neocon, but still, I mean, the first, second, and even third generation neocons, almost all of them, virtually all of them, essentially by definition, were leftists, at least Cold War Democrats, but many of them were members of the Trotskyite left before moving right. And so, but like, you don't count John Bolton. He's just a fellow traveler, but he's a lifelong conservative, kind of a Barry Goldwater right-wing nationalist type. And so he doesn't count as a neocon. He's just friends with them. So Bill Kristol, in a way, is not actually a neocon, right? He's the son of a neocon, but he was always just a conservative, but a very, to a traditional right winger, he is very much a center right rhino kind of squishy, like Nixon. The neocons, they have kind of a hard reputation as right wingers, but in fact, they're very much for the regulatory state and the welfare state and kind of, big government interventionism in the economy and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of these guys are certainly not hardcore against any of that stuff. I mean, they seem to have liked the various Reagan and Bush administrations just fine. That like they weren't. So I mean, that kind of level of maybe like I don't know that any of them were outraged about like tax cuts or deregulation under any of those administrations, but it's not really where they live, right? Like that's not what they primarily care about.
Yeah, of course, the libertarians by the end of Ronald Reagan, Murray Rothbard, declared his presidency an absolute failure and wrote Ronald Reagan an autopsy about just how horrible it was. The big government had done nothing but grow for 8 years under Reagan, along with the national debt and all the rest of it. So there was some deregulation, but of course, as I'm sure you know, most of the big deregulation of the Reagan years was actually done by Jimmy Carter before Ronald Reagan ever got there.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. So yeah, depending on how you feel about that,
reputations are one thing, but the details are something different, But anyway, the neocons essentially, they went from, I mean, look, we're talking about guys who, they moved right because they sided with America in the Cold War. Because one, they were Americans, not Russians, right? And two, they were Trots, and so they hated the Stalinists, and so they hated the Soviet Union. And then the American left, had been dominated, of course, by the Truman Democrats and Cold Warrior hawks. But then during Vietnam, the new left came and was very much, anti-war and anti-interventionism abroad. And I don't really know all the details of this, but certainly from the neocons' point of view, which matters, the new left was either silent or took the Palestinian side in the 67 war, or at least, failed to fully get behind Israel in the 67 war. And so, that combined with civil rights, I'm sure you probably know of Norman Podhoritz's essay, My Negro Problem and Ours, about, essentially the last thing we want is civil rights for blacks, because then they're going to beat us up more or whatever, I guess, was Norman Podhoritz's personal problem. Thaddeus Russell has this whole theory about Norman Podhoretz. I mean, you read that, what he's saying is like, if you're a nerdy Jewish kid growing up in New York and the blacks are beating you up all the time on the way home from school, well, then they're not oppressed. They're the oppressors. And you're the oppressed one, and then he kind of posed that onto the Israelis. And so the Israelis are just a nice little Jewish boy trying to get home from school, do his homework, getting beat up by the mean black kids from the wrong side of the tracks or whatever, who are the Palestinians. And kind of, this is sort of his take, what he learned about Israel Palestine growing up in the hood in New York. And so
love that metaphor,
yeah. So the new left was soft on blacks and soft on Vietnam. And so the neocons moved right. And, by the Reagan years, they, essentially were avowedly right wing and joined the Republican Party. Almost all of them. Richard Pearl, I believe, is still a card carrying Democrat to this day, they say. But even when he worked for Reagan, he was still a Democrat, I think. But,
yeah, Norman Podhoretz also has a son who's
John
following in his politics, right? That's
right, from Commentary Magazine, who's also absolutely horrible, right? And who I think also, it's a great point, right? Is we call him a neocon, but he kind of isn't, because his dad had already moved to the right, kind of, and he inherited his dad's exact same politics after he became a right winger.
Yeah, right.
When he was a trot.
Yeah, so like a neocon proper. Yeah, I mean, I think Norman Podhoretz, I don't think was ever a trot. He was certainly like a left liberal.
He was a trot. No. Norman Podhoretz was, I think, for not a very long time, but he and Kristol both were.
Okay, yeah. Must have been pretty brief, because when he was originally editor of Commentary, it was still like a pretty left liberal magazine, but he certainly wasn't like a socialist at that time. But I think so like we mean two different things by neocon, right? So one is somebody who's literally a is a new conservative. They started off as some kind of at least New Deal liberal, maybe a Trotskyist or Stalinist or whatever, different variation, and then they moved to the right. They became conservatives, and and I don't know. I do think that some of these people on the the welfare state and the regulatory state have what are, from my perspective, worse, or maybe from your perspective, better, politics than you're portraying as having. But regardless, right? Certainly, what their sort of core thing is wanting this kind of aggressive foreign policy that they had.
Andrew Coburn of the great Coburn brothers. He wrote, and I think that this is really right. There's really a lot to this. That essentially the new right, which is the military industrial complex, the cowboy side of the Yankee cowboy alliance.
Yeah.
That essentially the Rockefellers and the oil guys and the bankers, they already had the Council on Foreign Relations and their kind of own foreign policy establishment. But Lockheed and Northrop Grumman and Bell Helicopter and whoever, all these guys from Texas and Colorado and California and Washington State, Boeing, all these massive companies, they didn't really have their own eggheads. And so they made their alliance with the Israel lobby. And that's who the neoconservatives really are, is they're Israel's fifth column in the United States of America. And they're the cross between the Likud party's, vanguard edge of attempted control over American foreign policy apparatus with the cowboys who don't know how to write up studies of their own to justify all the products that they need to sell. And that they really made this alliance in the late 1970s. And then as they came into the Reagan administration, and, a very typical illustration of this, and this leads right back to Bill Kristol, of course, is Bruce Jackson, who was an executive vice president at Lockheed. And there's this wonderful article by a guy named Richard Cummings called Lockheed Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. And he showed where virtually all of the name brand neocons who were actually in the W. Bush government. So Hadley, Robert Joseph, Scooter Libby, John Hanna, and Abram Shulsky, Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, and just the whole crew of these guys, David Wormser, all of them were tied to Lockheed. All of them had served as, on an advisory board or another. Lynn Cheney had served on the board of directors, the vice president's wife. Hadley on the National Security Council, the deputy national security advisor, had been a lawyer for a firm that represented Lockheed in the past. And all these guys were very closely tied with Lockheed. And this guy, Bruce Jackson, had financed the Committee for NATO Expansion, which was later renamed the Committee for, I'm sorry, I forgot they renamed it, the Committee for the NATO Alliance. I'm very close to that. And then also founded the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq, which focused not on the weapons of mass destruction as much as on the humanitarian supposed concerns about the Saddam regime, and had spent millions and millions of dollars promoting these men and promoting their policies, which were completely congruent, not with the interests of the American people at large in any sense, but with the interests of the shareholders in Lockheed Martin.
Yeah. So I want to hone in on that last point, right? So, because say it earlier, right? We sort of mean two things by neoconservative. One is the sort of original meaning that's sort of the literal meaning, and another is like people who agree with those guys more or less.
Right. I try to not to use it too loosely because I'm really a student of Jim Loeb on this, and I really started learning from him right in 2003, 2004. He is really the greatest, of all the neoconservative chroniclers, I believe. And he has this great article called "All in the Neocon Family," and it's essentially about how like you could fill a Thanksgiving dinner table with the neoconservative movement, and they're all the brother-in-law of Mitch Decter somehow, or something, right? Like they are all these people are all very closely related to each other. The Abramses and the Kristolses are all in-laws and this kinds of things. So
yes, so I wanted to focus in on what you said about the Committee to Liberate Iraq. Because their big focus, was on the humanitarian aspect of the case for invading Iraq, and we all know how good the humanitarian consequences of that were.
Yeah.
But I think that really gets to something that you say that you pointed out in this debate with with Bill Kristol. Jake, I think we have this. This is the clip number 2, the Neoconservative Doctrine.
Note that in neoconservative doctrine, democracy absolutely must be spread to Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, but not Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, Egypt, or Pakistan. And if there's a democratically elected government that our government doesn't like, the U.S. won't hesitate to try to overthrow it, like in Algeria in 1993, Gaza in 2007, Egypt in 2013, and Ukraine in 2004 and 2014.
Got you there, buddy.
Yeah, right. And I mean, like, I think it's a sign of exactly how often this happens that maybe some of these were in there and I just missed them, but I mean, I think there are even some notable examples, for the last couple of decades that were left out, right, of attempted or successful, coups against democratically elected governments that the United States, supported.
I actually think that clip goes on, and I say, they overthrew the government in Honduras, or they supported the coup in Honduras in 2009 and in Bolivia in 2018. So, or maybe I might have mentioned them at a different time in the same.
No, I remember you did talk about Honduras at some point.
So it comes up later, but yeah, no, you're right. That was not meant to be a complete list.
yeah. I mean, to be fair, it would be hard to remember them all in the moment. But yeah, Honduras, which is a fun case because in terms of installing death squad regimes, is because Hillary Clinton in her memoir in the first edition, she brags about her role in
and then took it out for the paperback.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And which, by the way, I was recently a guest on Kennedy Nation. I now have kind of a regular guest spot on the Kennedy Show there on Fox Business Channel, and we were talking about the immigration crisis at the border, and I was explaining how this was all Hillary Clinton's fault because she put these right-wing businessmen in charge who made a deal with the drug lords who ran all these peasants off their property, and they all went to essentially the slums, and all this violence broke out and all these things, and that's why these people are now traveling to our border right now. That's who this giant caravan is. And when you're doing those shows, you can't see the other people at all. You're just looking into the camera kind of thing, But so that night I got home and watched it, and when I was saying that's who these people are, they're Hondurans fleeing the aftermath of the American supported coup there. The Republican was going, huh? And he didn't even realize that the people in the caravan were Hondurans at all. He just thought they were Mexicans. What's a Honduran? I don't know. He didn't know it, but that was the truth. That was who they were, and that was what they were fleeing from. And it's like, yes, it's true. We're talking about the consequences of a thing that happened a dozen years ago. So maybe you don't remember that, but some of us do. And this is the aftermath of that. But, being a Republican consultant means never having to know the history of anything, Just build the wall higher. That's all you need to know, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, like, and certainly, there was a attempted coup, at least, that was openly supported by the U.S. in Venezuela in 2002. George
Sure.
W. Bush actually sent Marines to remove Aristide as the democratically elected president of Haiti in 2004.
I can't
And then,
keep track of the Haiti ones. I'd have to stop and go back and read a couple of books about that or something. But there's always a regime change or another in Haiti, you know?
Mhm.
There was just
Yeah,
an
I mean,
assassination attempt against a guy there the other day,
yes,
the current
yes.
leader. And I was joking on Twitter about, I don't know if this is the CIA killing a guy or some guys trying to kill the CIA's guy or both. Something's
No,
going on.
no. I mean, it could be right. I mean, I was having lived in Miami for 6.5 years. I was very, very unsurprised that the that people involved in it, were based there. I saw the guy, uh, the Age of Napoleon podcast host, the discourse lover on Twitter. He had like this joke about how it must be a big problem at the Miami airport Hilton, when like the Committee for National Salvation of Haiti, has double booked the ballroom with the
Right.
Committee for a Free Cuba, and like that's like
Imagine.
it's
Crazy.
yeah, no,
CIA city.
yeah.
For real. So back to Bill Kristol. This guy, Bruce Jackson from Lockheed,
Mhm.
gave Bill Kristol a ton of money. He helped bankroll the Project for a New American Century. He helped bankroll the Weekly Standard, where they wrote the propaganda that I'm sure Dick Cheney had, hundreds of copies of the Weekly Standard delivered to every Republican in every part of the White House and every Republican on Capitol Hill and all their staff, just inundated them with this propaganda where they pushed the lies that led to war more than any other place or as much as any other place. And Bill Kristol, for people who are too young to remember, I mean, I've always, this whole last 20 years, I've lived 2002 over and over and over again. Now I'm doing it again, only now it's the 20th anniversary of 2002, of, the year of BS, of them lying us into war with Iraq for a year and a half straight. They did it. They lied. And
yeah, there was actually a point in this debate where Bill Kristol sort of says,
he was the kingpin. He was the
yeah,
kingpin. I was just reading.
yeah,
There's
yeah. And he just get it really quickly. He says at one point in this debate, I mean, we don't even have this clip. Like he says something like, "Well, I guess now that we know there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't have done that one." As if this were like a sincerely held belief of all of these Bush administration ghouls, and they had some great evidence that just later turned out to be misleading.
Oh yeah, I mean, come on. It was clearly the agenda was regime change and weapons were the excuse. And he knows that and everybody knows that. And I was just reading this great article from Justin Raimondo from 20 years ago. I'm going to try to make this a hashtag all year long where I can remember. And I'm tweeting out Raimondo 20 years ago and some of this just absolutely brilliant stuff that he was writing back then. And this one is from, I guess it's the end of March of 2002. And it's called Our Hijacked Foreign Policy. Neocons Take Washington. Baghdad is next. Now, at the time when I first read that, I didn't even know what a neocon was. I thought we were talking about the Republicans. What's a neocon? Oh, this weird little sect of Likudniks who, seized the Pentagon. Who knew that? The only person who would talk about that at all on TV was Chris Matthews. He was the only one who understood it. And he certainly would not really get into it and explain it in a way that his audience deserved to know who these men are and what they're up to, But anyway, in that article, the first little subline is the axis of Kristol. And it's about how Bill Kristol is the ringleader of this. If Dick Cheney is the ringleader of this inside the Bush government, then Bill Kristol is the ringleader of this in the think tanks and in publishing and in dominating TV news and in, making sure that all of the same people or, all of the worst people are all on the same page and pushing the same talking points in the echo chamber and all of that. He was the ringleader more than any other person in terms of, putting together essentially the group. It's not like these, they are all individuals. It's not like they're, every neocon is all on the same page, but they are when Bill Kristol comes with his lasso and he gets them and says, we are all going to AEI and we are all repeating what Ahmed Chalabi said. And we are all saying that this is going to work and we're going to do it like this and we're going to say it like that. And he was Dick Cheney had his men on the inside, and Bill Kristol ran the show on the outside. He is more responsible than any other man outside of government for lying us into Iraq War II. Justin called him the little Lenin of the neoconservative movement. Forget Trotsky. This guy wants to overthrow the whole world.
Yeah. I mean, I think that to give the Trotskyists their due, that it's certainly a political movement with flaws that could be annoyed, but I mean, I think that they did at least have this stance, the actual Trotskyists, that's like, okay, the Soviet Union is bad, but the U.S. is also bad, and we don't have to sort of choose atrocities.
That's why these guys were ex-Trotskyists, because they wanted to choose.
Exactly.
Yeah, they wanted to commit atrocities, and they needed some excuses. Look, the pedigree with Trotskyism is not really that important. Sometimes they say that, see, permanent revolution. The Trotskyites want permanent revolution, and the neocons kind of inherited that from them. And I think that's kind of right in the sense that they really aren't conservatives, right? They are radicals. They always were radicals. They moved from the left to the right, but they never really became conservatives. And the right and conservatism are not always necessarily synonyms in every important way. And there's a great interview with Michael Ledeen where he says, why do they call us neoconservatives? I don't know. I want to overthrow the whole world. I'm a radical, man. I don't want to stop seeing regime changes in my lifetime. I want America to spread democracy to every last state on the planet. And so there is a bit of that. Although, he's another one that's kind of a weird bird, right? Michael Ledeen. He's certainly a fanatic, but I don't think I guess I should say his left-wing credentials are pretty suspect. I think I don't know exactly what his origins were, but I don't think he was ever a leftist, but he gets called a neocon anyway. He's certainly extremely close with them.
I
guess
think
maybe unlike
Ledeen
Bolton,
is
he's Jewish and not a Gentile, so he gets kind of thrown in, whereas normally he would be maybe separated out.
So maybe there's a right, there's an element of that's
he's certainly a fanatic. I don't know what you call that, but he is clear that he wants a revolution. I don't know whether that really has much to do with Trotsky or not, but there certainly is radicalism in terms of belief system there, right? That we need more rapid change now, and we'll use the U.S. military to do it because nothing else will suffice to get the job done.
So I think that it's an interesting case, Ledeen, for the radicalism claim, because of course, in a sense, right? I mean, there are all these governments he wants to overthrow, but with the U.S., right? But like in a different sense, right? I mean, it's the sort of most raw, like the famous quote from Ledeen, right? The Ledeen doctrine, that once every 10 years or so, the United States should pick some, was it small, crappy little country and throw it up against the wall just to show the world who's boss.
That's right.
Is the kind of rawest possible expression of like hierarchy and like, I mean, that in a weird way, it sounds like something that like a Tory might have said at the height of the British Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying he ain't a hypocrite or anything, but I think in his own mind, he's Luke Skywalker taking on the Empire, right? Who could argue that Iran is the epitome of what liberal society should be in the world, right? And who would argue that Bhutan is exactly, that's how human society should be organized, the way they do it. So nobody has it as good as us, so they're not doing it right. And it's just terrible that the idea that we would refuse to help them when they need our help. It's so easy to frame intervention in that way, that we have so much power to do good. In fact, think of Samantha Power, for example, is a perfect example of this on the Democratic side, where she didn't have to move right. She's just a humanitarian interventionist. She always was a liberal Democrat, and she was a reporter. She saw a bunch of horror show go on in the Balkans and said America should have done more sooner. They should have done this on this date, and they didn't. And because they didn't, this other bad thing happened. And so it's the problem from hell. What are we going to do about here we sit in North America with unlimited power, while absolute atrocities are breaking out all over the world, and we're going to really sit on our hands and cluck our tongues and do nothing? We've got to go and save them. And the thing is, You and I know that Samantha Power is very interested in Samantha Power. Samantha Power wants a promotion. She wants attention. She's tired of doing these do-gooder, rinky-dink jobs like help Iraqi Christians. That's a quote from Michael Hastings' great article in the Rolling Stone about the war in Libya. She wanted attention from the president. She wanted a promotion. She wanted to move up in the foreign policy community. But turns out that a great way to do that would be to start a war in the name of humanitarianism, which happens to be the thing that she believed in and wrote a book about and, you know, had defined her identity around it. And so, I mean, even when critics asked her about Libya, she goes, look, what were we supposed to do? Be able to see the future and stuff? Like, sorry, it didn't work out, but shrug.
Yeah. What possible precedent could there be that would tell her, you know, that this would
That's right.
go
Look,
well?
but she meant well. She meant well. As Anne-Marie Slaughter said about Hillary Clinton, that, you know what, when something bad is going on, the thing about Hillary is when a decision that you make, if you make it or not, it could be bad either way. Well, then she would just rather be caught trying. Because what are you going to do? Nothing when you could at least try to do something? And now this is Hillary Clinton. This is the worst person in the world we're talking about here. But to her and her little girlfriends, they're the drink tea and eat little cakes and save the world committee. You know, they know what they're doing. And they certainly, at the time, you go back and look at the Libya war. Boy, if any three ladies ever thought they knew what they were doing, it was Hillary, Samantha Power, and Susan Rice during that time. You couldn't get more certain than that, you know?
So I think it's worth pointing out that, you know, we're talking, you know, you're talking about basically how these wars are sold, you know, to, you know, New York Times readers, you know, in this Samantha Power duty to protect, we're going to spread democracy sort of way. But I think a really important point that that you make during the debate that you did with Bill Kristol is that that's, you know, not, I mean, in some ways there's overlap, but it's not at all how it was sold to the Republican base. So Jake, this is clip number 5. We've got that. So
3 million in Vietnam and the 1.5 million or 2 million killed in America's Middle East wars just in the last 20 years. The people who always get left out of that are the people of Indonesia and East Timor and Bangladesh and Guatemala, of course. 500,000 dead in the civil war caused by the American coup in Guatemala. And of course, El Salvador and Nicaragua, all throughout the Middle East. And these are essentially massacres and you know, pseudo-genocides, even in some cases, perpetrated by American puppets, American compliant governments, governments protected by the United States of America. For example, Gerald Ford gave the green light for the massacre of the East Timorese in Indonesia in 1975. Richard Nixon gave the green light for the Pakistanis to carry out their atrocities in Bangladesh, and et cetera, et cetera. He always says, not just tonight, but always, America has kept the peace for 75 years. Are only white lives important?
Yeah, so which is really great, and I also want to show.
I wish I had said sanctions there too, Ben. I've kicking myself ever since that night that I just said, and the sanctions regime, crippling sanctions, economic war. They call Ron Paul an isolationist because he doesn't want to mass murder people. Ron Paul wants open and friendly relations with every nation in the world. We got sanctions on every nation in the world as we speak right now, and these monsters want to call the peace activists isolationists.
Afghanistan and the, you know, facing famine
That's right.
is also got U.S. sanctions on it. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And you know, Ron Paul, look, I hated a lot of things that Ron Paul said, but I mean, I loved it when the conversation turned to foreign policy, and suddenly it was like, wait a second, did Noam Chomsky somehow sneak into the Republican debate stage? You know, since he would make points like, you know, it's like, oh, you want to call people terrorists, you know, because they're like violently resisting, you know, U.S. troops, you know, but like, what would you do, you know, if some country invaded and occupied, you know, the United States, and so on and so forth. I actually remember a Republican debate audience in 2012 booing him because he said the United States should follow the golden rule in foreign policy, which tells you a lot about the people who attend those debates. But speaking of which, so I do want to show Kristol's response to that. But first, since we were talking about the Republican base just now and how these wars are sold to them, the clip that we wanted to show us, that's number 5, Jake.
A guy who built his political capital proclaiming on talk radio that Obama was a secret pro-terrorist Muslim from Kenya. In other words, your nemesis, Trump, was exploiting your movement's previous cultivation of this sort of illiberal sentiment among Republican voters back when it was still useful to your ends, building support for the wars. Now that the anti-Muslim chauvinism of the American right is no longer useful, you claim the right itself is now the greatest threat to democracy. If so, this is the nationalist movement the neoconservatives have done so much to cultivate and promote. For bin Laden and his friends were few, but would-be enemies who happened to be Muslim were many. So Bush and the neocons supported the worst sort of right-wing populist nationalism in America, especially with their wink and nod approach to the Muslim-hating hacks on AM talk radio. It was central to Karl Rove's plan for his permanent Republican majority. That was a big part of why my opponent was so determined to bring Sarah Palin on board with John McCain in 2008. She could get the rubes excited and afraid and keep them and convince them to continue to support the McCainian neoconservative doctrines behind the long war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the next line, I blew the next line too, because the next line I said, and that's why your friend Frank Gaffney drummed up all this thing about the mosque in New York City. But you know what? I should have double checked and Googled it, Ben, because as soon as I came home, I looked again, and Bill Kristol himself was really big on that, was huge on that, which for people who don't know, this is in 2010. Where
the so-called Ground Zero Mosque, which was actually a community center that was like, it was within
a Sufi mosque of, first of all, which are like, the hippies of the Muslim world. And it was like 4 blocks away, which is a town away.
I mean, in that, like, you're going to say, it's within like a few blocks, but then like so are hundreds of businesses and and buildings there. There are strip clubs. There are like tons of things.
But what they told the people was
they're on Ground Zero. That would be included. Yeah.
So the propaganda was that they're building this mosque essentially at Ground Zero, and it symbolizes the Muslim terrorist enemy's triumph over the American people. Like, they won the war. They've conquered us. They're coming for you and your family next. And they pass at the same time all that through, I don't know, maybe like 20 state legislatures or maybe more. They got, and it was the Israel lobby
law bills.
Yeah, the Sharia law bills. And it was the Israel lobby who led the charge on this. And Eli Clifton and Max Blumenthal, 2 nice young Jewish boys, were the ones who did the best journalism on this, by the way, who showed that it was Rabbi Shmuley something from Brooklyn was the guy, like the kingpin behind the Protect America from Sharia Law Act getting pushed through the Oklahoma state legislature. I was like, you can't get more cynical than this. That, listen, Oklahomans, you don't have a thing to fear from Muslims, but we have a severe interest in trying to make you afraid of Muslims. So what we're going to do is we're going to get your congressman to pass a law to prevent the takeover of Oklahoma by Sharia law. And then that will leave a certain percentage of the Oklahoman right with the impression that there was a real problem there that had to be confronted, that there was a real danger, that we were being overtaken by the Muslim enemy. And people really did believe it. It was effective.
Be fair, Scott. I mean, like, probably if that law had, if they hadn't done that, it probably would have been like 6 months before Oklahoma, was a Islamic fundamentalist separatist state.
Hey, why not? I don't know. In the world of unreality that we live in now, but it's so effective in terms of propaganda. Same with the Sarah Palin thing. But like, the problem with the storyline that all of the Muslim world is this one big Islamo-fascist caliphate that's unified and headed this way is that just is not true, right? And rather than being kind of the vanguard edge of the coming Muslim wave and the rising Islamic civilization conquering America, September 11th was a last gasp Hail Mary pass by this tiny little group of bandits to see if they could provoke the superpower into, blundering into turning the whole Middle East over, speaking of radicalism. And it worked because the Americans, of course, the special interests, had an interest in, carrying that same narrative forward, when the truth of the matter was they're not coming. And that was why the FBI had to frame 250 or 300, idiots into saying they loved Osama so that they could go, parade them on TV and make it seem like there was a terrorist menace here. That's why they had to pass all these anti-Sharia bills, is because otherwise there's nothing going on. It's like that Bill Hicks joke where you watch CNN and they drive you crazy. War, famine, death, AIDS, the coming Muslim takeover, whatever. And then you look out your window and he does this great imitation of a bird chirping that I can't do, but you look out your window and things are pretty nice. It doesn't really.
Yeah.
So like, man, it's been a while since September 11th, and then we got the failed shoe bomber, and we got the failed underpants bomber, and we got the failed subway bomber, and we got the failed Brooklyn Bridge cutting torch guy, and we got, what do we got, right?
No. I mean, in a great many of these cases, I mean, like, you actually look at the court documents, and it was like, yeah, we spent it. We found this like lonely, mentally ill young Muslim man, and we spent like a year and a half giving him the hard sell to join our fake terrorist cell, and finally he said yes, and we clapped on the handcuffs. That's really defending us against a very imminent threat. I mean, I guess the one thing I would put,
there's a great book about that, by the way, called The Terror Factory by Trevor Aronson, and he is the world's expert on that. There's more than 300 of these entrapment cases now.
Yeah. No, it's disgusting. I mean, the one thing I would, push back on a little bit is the extent to which this is a special interest issue, or sort of the, people, kind of influence, like on behalf of Israel. I mean, it is, of course, certainly true that pro-Israel groups, do tons of lobbying. There are also lots of other client states, the United States, that do tons of lobbying, Saudis, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
But I think that the reason, right? Like, okay, I mean, I'm not going to say that has no effect, because of course it does, right? They wouldn't do it if it didn't, but like, it seems like the reason why the United States, supports Israel, by the way, and like flaming contradiction to all this rhetoric about, spreading democracy, right? I mean, like, what's the, what about like the, millions of Palestinians, who are stateless, right? I mean, like, where are their democratic rights? But, the reason why it does it is the same reason why, with the same flaming contradiction, it supports Saudi Arabia, it supported dictatorships in Egypt, overthrown all those governments you just mentioned, right? Because it's seen as a sort of useful relationship for maintaining American power, right? I mean, what in this debate, Bill Kristol calls benevolent global hegemony by the United States, and I think a lot of people around the world would quarrel with how benevolent it is, but I mean, I think he's not wrong about the global hegemony part.
Oh yeah, no, that's true, but I object to the thing about, well, look, I mean, the reality of whatever benefit America gets from Israel compared to what the American experts in charge think they're getting out of it are two different things, right? So I think that Israel, is purely a strategic liability. The only things that you can point on them doing favors for us is things like selling missiles to the Ayatollah at the same time we're selling bombs to Saddam to fight him with, or, helping arm Al-Qaeda in Syria or something, which makes them the enemies of the American people, stealing our technology and then selling it to the Chinese and whatever it is. They don't do anything. The American people get nothing out of it at all.
Well,
I really highly recommend. I'm sorry.
Oh, the American people most certainly do not, right? I mean,
any more
than the American people get anything out of like a military dictatorship being in power.
But I
don't
think the empire does either, right? I mean, the Israelis their biggest fear is that America will make friends with Iran again. Because, America has an interest in being friends with Iran. First of all that oil and all that money, but also being friends with them helps us lord it over the Arabs and hem them in and make sure that they stay, on track and doing what they're supposed to do and all this kind of thing. So the Israelis are constantly, for 30 years now, have been in a state of alarm that the Americans are going to figure out a way to start getting along with the Ayatollah. And they do everything they can to prevent that since the early Bill Clinton years. They're the ones who insisted. It was Yitzhak Shamir's guy, Martin Indyk, who insisted on the policy of dual containment from Saudi Arabia. We bombed Iraq, which our great allies, the Israelis, had to stay out. If they had joined the coalition, that would have ruined the whole coalition because no one else wants to be in a coalition with them. So they had to stay out of the war rather than fighting it for us like a good client state would. But then after the war, America bombed Iraq so bad they weren't able to contain Iran anymore. So the Israelis insisted that Clinton stay in the dual containment policy to contain Iraq and Iran both from Saudi Arabia, which is the policy that got us attacked and our towers knocked down a few years later. It was exactly that. And why are we doing it? At Israeli behest, at their absolute insistence. And, I highly recommend this great book, Treacherous Alliance. You may have read it, Treacherous Alliance by Trita Parsi. It started out his PhD project and then became a whole book. And it's essentially, I love it so good because it's based all on the entire point of view. It's told from the point of view of the highest level strategists in America, Israel, and Iran. And of course, the poor Iraqis are stuck in the middle of all of this. But it explores the entire relationship between America, Israel, and Iran, especially from, the 70s through today, kind of a thing. And goes to show, where the Israelis say over and over again, geez, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we couldn't think of a good reason why the Americans needed us anymore. So we came up with this crap about radical Islam as supposedly represented by the Iranians. It was new glue for the alliance with America. And it was the reason why the Americans could never, ever, ever negotiate with the Ayatollah, because the Ayatollah represents radical Islam, the terrible threat. And then, of course, by the way, I'm sure you've noticed that the American people's enemies, yes, created for us by our own government, but still those who have slaughtered the Americans by thousands, civilians by the thousands, Al-Qaeda, they are the avowed enemies of the Ayatollah in Iran, of Bashar al-Assad and Saddam Hussein and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. All of Israel's enemies are enemies of Al-Qaeda. And yet what does America do? America fights the war against Israel's enemies, not against Al-Qaeda. And explicitly in the cases of Syria and in Yemen, they take Al-Qaeda's side, outright back them. And, while we're supposed to believe the neoconservatives, they just can't see any daylight in Israel's interests and America's interests. Well, how about that? Our enemies are the Sunnis, not the Shiites. Their enemies are the Shiites, not the Sunnis. And yet, which side of the war are we fighting on, and at whose behest?
Yeah, I would say that that there are a lot of things that the American empire does that are, that are overextensions, that are things that even there's a sense that narrow, cynical imperial self-interest, shouldn't do, right? But still happen, right? I think that's why Joe Biden finally off the mandate of Afghanistan. It's not he'd suddenly become a principal anti-imperialist or anything. After a career of supporting wars around the world, it's that he realized that this is even in terms of sort of imperial self-interest, just maintaining this war for another 10 years or another 20 years or whatever, it was nothing, nothing good even on that level was going to come from it. And I think that probably a lot of client states that the U.S. supports, you can ask, you could raise questions about that, right? I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that everybody we don't like is super rational about pursuing what would work out best for them, and there really aren't. But I do want to, I do want to make sure we have time to do this. So I want to see. So we saw earlier you were rattling off all of the authoritarian regimes that the United States supports and does not advocate. Regime change in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and you rattled off a bunch of coups, and you mentioned in particular Suharto in Indonesia, who committed the worst genocide since World War II, at least at one point, and maybe it's been surpassed since then in East Timor. And I want to watch Kristol's response to this. So this is number 4 in the list of clips.
I'm going to have a comment on a discourse that, trivializes the Holocaust by saying the United States has conducted Holocaust, that attacks, that demeans the United States in really a grotesque way. If we made mistakes, did we give, as you say, green lights or yellow lights when we shouldn't have? That could be. Talk to people from East Timor, though. Talk to people from Bangladesh. Do they want the U.S. to just withdraw and leave them to the mercies of their neighbors, or would they prefer for the U.S. to have done more and to be doing more? And as we have done more since, incidentally, the Pakistan and Bangladesh split off from Pakistan, doing more to keep the peace there. Talk to people who care about liberty around the world. They understand that for all the mistakes we make, and that we are important to them, to their peace, to their prosperity, to their liberty. People of all colors, I would say, all ethnicities, all religions.
We should do that. We should go to East Timor and ask them whether they like the Americans. Whether they're glad we're around supporting the government of Indonesia. I wonder what the people of West Papua think, Oh, wait, I know what they think. Stop bleeding.
Yeah, well, of course, every actual opinion poll in the Middle East, shows that that most people do not like American involvement there. I guess that the people who care about liberty, whatever William Kristol means by that,
I really botched that. I should have answered very specifically about that. I think I may have had this in my notes somewhere too. There's so much unsaid that I wish I'd been able to say there, but there is a great book by the Gallup poll called "What a Billion Muslims Really Think" that came out in 2009, I think it was, where they went to Muslim countries from Morocco to the Philippines. They skipped the most dangerous war zones, but they went everywhere else and they talked to everybody. And everybody said they like Americans, they like white people, they don't mind Christianity, they like all of the evil, horrible, sinful depictions of adultery in R-rated Hollywood movies. That's what they like about us, is our debauchery, and they wish that they could be free like us. I may be overstating that last part a little bit. You know what I mean, though.
But I don't.
They would like to be free like us. They don't resent us. They resent our government killing them. It's as simple as that.
No, exactly. And I think that what really strikes me about that clip is that Kristol is framing the issue about East Timor as whether it's like, okay, sure, there are cases where we didn't do enough. And it's like, well, it seems like a case where we did considerably too much, right? I mean, spending decades backing and arming and funding this grotesque dictatorship that was killing the East Timorese. But I think in Kristol's view of the world, the only way bad things can happen, it's a little bit of a caricature, but I don't think that much of a caricature, is that the United States isn't doing something, right? That they and the worst thing you could ever maybe say about something the United States does is that it was a mistake.
Right.
It's like certainly not like a crime.
It's fun,
but a mistake.
By the end of the thing, of course, he said he was anti-war. And I think for the first time, he said that we shouldn't have done Iraq War II. Mm-hmm. And I know some of the others have said that in the past, but I think that was the first time he said that, oh, geez, knowing now that there weren't weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah. As who could have figured out in 2002.
Right. But, he also, and this is a guy who's been a hawk this entire, century long so far. It's not like he stopped until that night. He, hell, what was my train of thought there? He, I can't remember what the hell I was going to say, Ben. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that the, when we're talking...
I know what it was. I'm sorry.
Let
me say, because I'll forget again.
Yep.
I got holes in my brain. The audience question was, well, can you name any successes? And I really should have been paying better attention at this point, because I'm looking at my notes and stuff, and instead of really listening carefully. The question was, hey, Bill, can you tell us any interventions where it really worked out like you hoped? And he goes back to Bosnia in '94. And so what I did was, because I'm Mr. Names and Dates boy over here instead of, an actual thinking man of any kind. And so I go, oh, yeah, well, it was the American ambassador Zimmerman that ruined the peace deal that caused the war that then the Dayton Accords were meant to solve. And all that intervention was meant to solve. But it was American intervention in the first place that scotched the original deal that they had struck, I guess, at Lisbon. which is right. And I kind of screwed up the details. Actually, there was a guy from Bosnia was like, actually, it was this guy and that guy, not the other way around, and whatever. So I screwed up the details there, but I was still right. But
yeah, and it's
what
also,
I should have said was,
yeah.
But what I should have said was, as Dave Smith pointed out to me later, was he just had to go back to 1994.
Right.
He couldn't invoke a single one of the interventions that he supported in our current era whatsoever. Not even Kosovo. He won't even go back to 99 in Kosovo, much less Iraq War II, 20 years in Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen. What about all the color-coded revolutions and overthrowing all the governments in Russia's near abroad? He can't stand by any of this.
No,
he can't stand by any of this. And that's the point I missed. I'm going off. I'm like, nah, because in 1994, I read one time that blah, blah, totally missed the major point that he is essentially completely surrendering there. Completely, America's worst hawk saying none of it was worth it at all. Not any of it at all.
Yeah, right. I mean, like, just to put a sharper point on that, I mean, he's like the war he's going back to, Bosnia, is committed, before, he and his associates like had the most influence, right? I mean, that was like the Clinton.
That was under Bill Clinton, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a really good point. But I mean, I guess this is something, maybe we could end with like your comment on this, that I find really infuriating, not just about Bill Kristol, but I think in general, like American, media and political discourse about stuff like this. You mentioned Samantha Powers earlier. She's sort of the, liberal version of it. That discussions about like horrible things happening in other parts of the world, which, whatever. I mean, sometimes are caused by U.S. policy, as you pointed out many times in the debate. Sometimes they aren't. But the discussions about horrible things happening elsewhere in the world are always framed as, well, you do something or you do nothing. And the only thing that ever counts as doing something is like bombing or invading or, having a military occupation, at the very least sending some special forces. It's only military intervention that only ever counts as doing anything, right? Like it seems like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just a big softy on this, but it seems like, I don't know, like if people are fleeing terrible situations, you could bomb their country and install install a U.S. friendly government and quite often create more instability that's going to make the same situation worse over time. Like that is one form of doing something. But another form of doing something is you could just let the people who are fleeing from that situation come to the United States, that's as refugees. Right. But that never quite seems to count as doing something.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, too, is you stop creating the refugees, like we talked about with Honduras. I mean, if you go back to the refugee crisis of 2015 and 16 here, literally, they were fleeing Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Yemen. These were, and Somalia, if they could. These were all countries that America had been bombing. Now, there were some economic migrants from sub-Saharan Africa who you could still blame on the war in Libya because Gaddafi was keeping them from all trying to, drown, trying to get to Italy and all of that. So he was the cork on that bottle that they opened there. So they weren't directly refugees from America's wars, although really the Libya, some of them may have been, because the Libya war spread down into Mali and Niger and Chad and Burkina Faso and Sierra Leone and all that, almost directly after, by 2012 and 13, it had spread into Mali and into Western Africa. So many of those people were actually fleeing the results of the Libyan war as well. Some of them were just economic migrants, but again, the Libyan war, but most of them were coming from countries we were bombing. They were literally coming from the countries we were bombing that whole time. And so, and what's funny is, see, this is really what led to the end of the American empire. I mean, the project, I think it was Gary North wrote that, David Rockefeller lived to see Brexit. That, it was already, he died at 99 or something, but it was already coming apart. And right-wingers were elected to the European Parliament, in large measures, and they were elected and almost elected in all kinds of elections. And, the nationalists almost came to power in France. And all this, severe move to the right and against the entire organization of the European Union, which is, of course, an extension of the American imperial project. And, people blame the Russians for stealing the election for Donald Trump. Well, and they tried to blame them for Brexit too, and for votes, that went right in France and in Germany. But in all of those cases, this was later debunked. These accusations blaming this on Russia, none of it was true. It was the people moving right because they were fed up with the center-left liberal establishment in America and in Europe, who supported all these wars that dug them this grave and got them into this mess.
Yeah, I think that there is certainly a relationship there. I think that as you point out at one point, the debate that wars help create refugees, and and refugee crises help fuel the sort of like xenophobic right wing,
and the boom and bust too, the economic crises too,
pseudo populism that you get with Trump and Brexit. But I think that's absolutely right. But I think I think it is really revealing about the America's role in the world in the time that we've had what Bill Kristol calls benevolent hegemony, letting in refugees doesn't count as doing something. Just cutting off the supply of arms to bad actors doesn't count as doing something. Diplomacy doesn't even count as doing something, right? It's only it's like, are you indifferent to this, or do you want to drop more bombs, right? That's the way that it's always framed.
There's a guy from Cato from a long time ago. I guess he's around again now or something. Justin Logan is his name, and he wrote this essay way back when called "The Fallacy of 39." Or was it 38? I think 39. And it's about how everybody is Neville Chamberlain and everybody else is Hitler. And so, the only thing that anyone can ever do is bow down and scrape before Hitler, the worst dictator who ever lived and worst warmonger who ever lived. And then all anyone else can do is point at and mock that person and ridicule that person for always being an appeaser. And that was one of the things that I was trying to use against Kristol too, is that, I'm the one supposedly diminishing the Holocaust by saying factually that America's killed a Holocaust worth of civilians not during World War II, but in the time since World War II. And he says, oh, that's trivializing the Holocaust. Well, but they're the ones who called even David Koresh is Hitler. Manuel Noriega is Hitler. Slobodan Milosevic is Hitler. Right. Yeah, and Saddam Hussein. I mean, I remember I was 15, but I still remember that they called him Adolf Hitler and said, obviously, Kuwait is first, and then he's going to move on Saudi Arabia, and then the world, Ben. He's going to conquer the world because he's Hitler, and he'll settle for nothing less than conquering the world. And by the way, did we mention he's got the 4th largest army in the world? And apparently he could be in Berlin by next Sunday if we don't stop him at Riyadh, where he wasn't even going to Riyadh. They had to lie and pretend that he was preparing to invade Saudi. They knew he wasn't going to invade Saudi. He won a coup de main in a day and a half in Kuwait. He wasn't trying to get into a war and get obliterated. They were lying, and they do it all the time. Everybody's Adolf Hitler. And yet, if everybody's Adolf Hitler, what does that make Adolf Hitler?
Yeah, right. Like, he's not that special, and like it's you can't really say this is this unique evil in history if every like petty dictator happens to come into America's crosshairs.
Which of course it was, right? Like here is a guy who, when they said, okay, look, I mean, what were they going to do about Czechoslovakia anyway, Ben? You tell me. I don't know, but even after that,
that's actually also a point, because it's I mean, it's such a cliche that the appeasing Hitler at Munich thing. My understanding is that it's a little bit unclear, like that it would have actually played out well if the war had started earlier, right?
Sure, they weren't ready. The British weren't ready for a war. What are they going to do? Field troops into Czechoslovakia somehow? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, like if Chamberlain had done that, it Hitler might have had a much better chance in the war, than he ultimately had
Right.
when it happened. Well, in any case, Scott, obviously, as people can tell from many things said, you're a libertarian. We can have many disagreements about economics and COVID and other things, but I really appreciate you saying these things to Bill Kristol's face. That is a mitzvah. So this was great. I'm glad I watched the debate. I'm glad he came on here to talk about it. Thanks, Scott.
Cool. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Great. All right. That was Scott Horton of antiwar.com. You should check out his debate with Bill Kristol about America's forever wars around the world. But now we are going to have our very own producer, Jake Appett, who is going to do his still, I believe, unnamed labor segment.
Yeah, I think we need submissions from some commenters about what we're going to call this labor segment. But so for today's segment, I wanted to talk about something that I think we usually talk about stuff that is pretty depressing, right? So we want to talk about one of the best developments of last year, which is that Starbucks workers around the country are starting to fight back, and they're not just fighting back, but they're building a structure to last, right? And that there's kind of the difference between doing workplace action versus building a union, right? Is that union could actually, it could take that anger and translate it into real gains, because sometimes there could be some, flash bin point of anger, but then if there's no structure, to built on top of it, then those gains are going to be temporary. I see Ben's made me, I'm taking over the show for a little bit. So we're talking about the victory in Starbucks today, and I'm going to try to give you a little perspective as a union organizer. So I don't know how many people in the comments are, looking to, form a union. I see some good titles in the comments, but hopefully, with these segments, I can give you like a little flavor of what it's like doing a union drive. So first of all, in terms of really brief background, what's going on with Starbucks, there was a union victory in Elmwood, New York, which I think is just outside of Buffalo. So that was the first Starbucks that won. And this video, I kind of rewatch it whenever I want to pick me up. This is a video of the workers finding out the results of their vote. Yeah, so I think that could be pretty good motivation for like how it feels to actually win a union vote. And I think, part of why it feels that good is because of how fucking hard the company is going to fight to make sure that you don't win. It's like they're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a store that's filled with maybe 10 to 15 employees at most. That's how much they fear this stuff. And the good news coming out of literally just today, which we didn't plan the labor segment today for that reason, is that another Starbucks in Buffalo has, in Genesee Street, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, has voted to unionize, and they won their election. So that's really awesome. And there's also been stores in Cleveland recently and Boston a little bit before that, Starbucks stores that have voted to unionize. So if you work at Starbucks and you're watching this show, I encourage you to unionize your store. But, I think part of being a labor organizer is we try to get, we do a process called inoculation as part of union organizing. And Andy says it's Genesee. He knows much more about upstate than I do. But anyway, so we do a process called inoculation, which for these times is very apt, right? Which is, I don't think that the mRNA vaccines work this way, but basically inoculation is you give a worker a little bit of the virus, which in this case is what is the company going to do to try to beat back the union, and so that you build up antibodies, metaphorical antibodies, so that when it comes, you're not taken off guard. So we don't have that much time today, but I want to very quickly play a video from this guy who wrote this book called Confessions of a Union Buster. And basically there's these people that will never call themselves union busters, but that's really what their job is. They call themselves like HR reps. And I didn't like edit this video, so excuse the corny music, but he talks a little bit about the psychology behind busting a union drive.
I conducted in excess of 200, almost 250 anti-union campaigns. And during that same period, I lost only 5. I never called myself a union buster. And most union busters today, unless they're in private circles, don't call themselves union busters. They call themselves labor relations consultants, employee relations consultants, human resource consultants, any benign label they can give themselves. So a union buster without the atmosphere or climate of fear is like working without one leg and one arm. I mean, fear is essential. Fear is like caviar, lobster, and filet mignon. A union buster can't, along with breaking the law, the emotion and element of fear is vital. There isn't.
So yeah, that's kind of creepy, right? I mean, excuse the like over the top cheesy creepy music, but it's kind of creepy that this guy who's extremely successful says that fear is like the filet mignon of the union buster. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but it's you know, it makes it you know, pretty nakedly clear kind of the disgusting lengths that this industry would go to. So going back to Starbucks, just to kind of wrap this up, I think I actually saw via our friends at the Majority Report, they have, so part of the anti-union drive, right, is they're going to have these captive audience meetings where they're mandatory meetings where they try to convince you to join the union. Maybe part of why Starbucks wasn't able to beat back the union drive is because they brought in Howard Schultz for their captive audience meeting, which isn't a good idea because they should bring an expert like this guy. And he fucking sucked at it. And he made the weirdest analogy ever for why you shouldn't unionize.
3 Starbucks franchises in Buffalo that are attempting to unionize and in and around Buffalo. And this is obviously a terror for management in terms of the idea that, like, wait a second, could this happen all around the country? So Howard Schultz flew in. When you look at what he's going to be talking about here, it really is amazing.
That when people in Germany and in Poland were sent to the concentration camps, they were thrown into rail cars, and sometimes the journey was 8 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours, no light, no water, no food. And when they arrived at the camps, the rail cars were slammed open, and you could hear that metal door just right against the cold weather. Men were separated from women, and women were separated from children. And 1 person for every 6 was given a blanket. 1 blanket for every 6 people. And the person who got the blanket had to decide what to do with this blanket that I have for myself. And not everyone, but most people shared their blanket with 5 other people. And the rabbi says to me, take your blanket and go share it with 5 other people. And so much of that story is threaded into what we have tried to do at Starbucks, is share our blanket.
Yeah, so, you know, a billionaire owner of Starbucks that once considered an egotistical run for president is the prototypical example of someone who wants to share his blanket and not, you know, maybe having solidarity with your coworkers, forming a union, in my book. And you know, we could get Ben's opinion on this, but that seems like a greater example of whatever sharing your blanket means. I think he might, as they point out on the majority report, this is not a man who maybe has incredible self-awareness, which is why you should leave the union busting to the experts. And looking at the comments, the guy before who was talking with the music behind him, he was confessing his sins, basically, like after a whole successful career in union busting. So the last thing I wanted to bring up is, actually one of our organizing committees, I'm not sure which one actually, they formed something to beat back the captive audience meeting, and it's this bingo card that I think workers have actually played it during a captive audience meeting, which is that the good thing we can tell workers is that the union busters basically have a script, and they almost never deviate from that script. So if you've never heard it before, it sounds pretty convincing. But if you know it's coming, like they're going to say, the union is a third party. We call that third partying the union. They want a third party of the union. Union just wants your money. Union protects lazy workers. All these things aren't, a lot of these things have a grain of truth, but then they twist it in a way that's aimed to deceive. I know that, all sorts of crazy things come out in union drives. Like workers start saying, like, is it true that, I can't hang out on the weekends with my manager anymore after the union starts? And it's kind of like there's no union rule about whether or not you could go play softball with your manager. But that's just the kind of thing that they're going to try to convince you to warp your mind. But I think it's really inspiring that a bunch of Starbucks stores are starting to go union. I, from firsthand experience, know how hard it is to organize individual shops that are really small. So it takes a lot of courage. And as long as they're ready, I think that we're going to see more victories. So that's it for the yet to be named labor segment, Ben.
I like to give them a union suggestion.
Oh, that's too good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say that I have a blanket. It's a Dallas Cowboys blanket, and my mom gave it to me years ago, and it's the best blanket in the world. And I don't share it with Ben, but I do share it with our cat.
I'm not sure how that fits into the Holocaust analogy, but there you have it.
Blanket sharing.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, actually, that the tie-in at the end of the segment, with the interview with Scott Horton, he was talking about how, when he says, these wars, killed, this like genocidal number of people, and Bill Kristol says, oh, you're trivializing the Holocaust. He points out, it's like, no, but like you guys are trivializing the Holocaust because you compare everyone to Hitler, Manuel Noriega is Hitler, Saddam Hussein is Hitler, whatever, it's like, and it's like, and I do agree that, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, because if Hitler is this unique evil, everybody can't be Hitler, right? Like if you, he's not that special if everybody's Hitler. But as ridiculous as it is to compare Manuel Noriega or whoever to Hitler, man, that was a much worse Holocaust analogy.
Yeah, invoking the Holocaust. I don't know what Howard's personal family history is with the Holocaust. So, he might have. I don't know, but in my book, invoking the Holocaust to try to beat back workers who are, probably fighting for like $1 an hour raise or something like that is probably one of the most disgusting things you can do. So I'm glad that they won.
Yeah, I'm also not surprised that wasn't a convincing pitch. This is
they need that guy from the Union Buster Confesses. Like, he knows how to do it. There's a whole script. He was just he was freestyling out there, and it didn't work.
Yeah. No, this is why you need notes. You just shouldn't try to wing it, or else you're like, hey, you guys who want to organize, you can get $1 extra for making coffee. What you're doing is a lot like when Hitler invaded Poland, and then you set up these concentration camps, and people had to share the blankets. Or I got lost at a certain point in the analogy, but I'm thinking that he, maybe he couldn't have done better, but certainly if he brought in a pro, they could have done better. All right.
Do you remember when we were doing the fat acceptance movement in our ethics classes, and that woman was talking about how the fat acceptance movement was like Hitler? Do you remember that?
Wait a second. Was it the fat acceptance movement was like Hitler?
Oh no, it was the other people. It was the other side.
It was the other way around.
Yeah,
it was
they were like Hitler.
people who were like glorifying thinness too much were like Hitler.
Yeah,
that's what this like fat acceptance person was saying. Which I don't know. I mean, I kind of think Hitler did stuff that was worse than promoting thinness or health or getting people an extra buck or two to make coffee. In fact, actually, I would say significantly worse. Like it's not just slightly worse, but like much worse than that. That all of the wars and invasions and extermination of minorities and all that stuff. I think that's significantly worse than either promoting whatever ideal of what bodies should look like or having or organizing Starbucks workers. All right, that's pretty amazing. I think you're gonna have a hard time topping that next week, but this was fantastic. Excited about the segment. I'm going to do the philosophy segment in just a minute, but first let's do a quick preview for the patron-exclusive episode that came out this weekend with Matt McManus about his
Let's do that.
His Jacobin article, To Beat the Right, You Have to Understand Their Arguments. I think I'm getting that title right. We are talking today about this article. To beat the right, we have to understand their arguments, which is obviously, I don't read everything that Matt writes because he's obscenely productive, but I do try to read a fair chunk of it, and when I saw the title of this, I was definitely going to read that. That's obviously our our bread and butter here, and in it, you're talking about how to to think about and respond to the sort of most intellectually sophisticated versions of conservatism. So, of course, let's start by talking about James Lindsay.
I just want to say also, Ben, I fucking love the title song for this so much that every time I come on, I get anxious because I think there's no way I can possibly top that song.
That's the correct reaction.
Well.
Yeah, I will say every time it's on, when we're doing the live streams instead of Jen doing the segment of the episode, and so she'd sit through the song. She always started dancing in her chair. So the song
is a catchy little tune, isn't it?
It is a very catchy little tune. The song is widely loved, but I wanted to talk about someone who's much less widely loved on this.
Wait, can I say two things before we get started?
Yeah, please.
So y'all know I'm from Texas. So
wait, what?
People in the chat, commenting about me being a Cowboys fan. Y'all know I'm from Texas. So what do you expect? And the other thing I want to say is Roll Tide.
Please don't do that.
Ben loves it when I do that.
Yeah, I particularly love it when you do it at sports bars in East Lansing.
It's particularly fun to do it there.
If a fight got started because you said that, it would not be you. It would be me.
Sure would not.
So, do not do that.
Yes, that is an Alabama thing. Alabama's playing Georgia right now in the national championship game, which has not been that exciting, I have to tell you. Not nearly as exciting as last night's Raiders-Chargers, which almost came down to a tie, which would have had all these playoff implications anyway.
Or the Peach Bowl, that was the most exciting.
Nobody cares about the Peach Bowl.
But MSU was in it. That's what counts. All right. So moving on from, she has many good qualities from some of Jen's sketchier sports loyalties. I think we met at the very beginning of the show. We kind of got caught up talking about the Dick Cheney thing, and we didn't get to it. Maybe we'll do it next episode, which is not going to be next week because I'm going to be getting back from a conference next Monday. But week after next, on the 24th, maybe we'll do it then. We're going to show a clip of Christopher Hitchens from the the 80s to kind of show how his foreign policy views had changed.
You just turn the show over to me.
Not after all that. No.
It'll be sports night with Dr. Jen.
Well, somebody who'd requested a signed copy of the book, Christopher Hitchens, what he got right, how he went wrong, and why he still matters. See how smoothly I did that? Somebody who did that did say in their note that Jen should have her own sports segment, but I'm really questioning that after what we just saw. So yeah. And that book has been, so it's been out for a little over a week. There was a hot minute where it was the #1 new release in atheism on the Amazon, like the Kindle edition was, and I think it was like #3 in history and theory of politics. Although if you are going to order it from somewhere, and not, I'm happy to just sell to you directly and sign it. But if you want to order from somewhere, I would recommend not Amazon, but Red Emma's, redemmas.org.
Wasn't it something in agnosticism?
Yeah.
Also?
Yeah. It's actually also frequently been the #1 new release in agnosticism. There was actually one point where, this is not that I would know. I'm very cool and indifferent to this. I certainly haven't checked any of these rankings at any point in the last
every hour on the hour
in the last week. But yeah, there was one point where it's been #1 new release in agnosticism for a long, off and on pretty much since it came out. But it was #1 overall in there at one point, which is funny because there are like 3 sentences in the book about agnosticism. But okay, I'll take it. But of course, what Christopher Hitchens was known for, even though a lot of the book is about politics, is about of course, about his writing about people like Henry Kissinger and Bill Clinton. It's about the evolution in, obviously, See Above interview with Scott Horton, what I see as the wrong direction of foreign policy. But of course, inevitably, because that is a subject we spend a lot of time on. Some of it is on his debates about religion, and a little bit of it. This will bring us to the subject for the philosophy segment. A little bit of it is about another book about Hitchens written by this guy Larry Taunton. And I think we have the graphic of that book. Yeah, there we go. The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, The Restless Soul of the World's Most Notorious Atheist, by Larry Allen Taunton. And Larry Taunton is this evangelical who Hitchens would do debates with, but he also became friends with. And it's a really weird book. One thing whatever else I got out of it, that Larry Taunton is not a very good friend, because he's writing about his dead friend, and he's like suggesting that I don't actually think he was making anything up. Some people did say that. It's like, oh, these were all unverifiable conversations, whatever. I actually don't think that. I think that Taunton was just interpreting what Hitchens said to him in kind of dumb ways. So
he's not a bad friend, just a dummy.
Well, dummy, also bad friend though, because he's
why not both?
Exactly, why not both? Because he's because a lot of the book is about suggesting that Hitchens was actually wavering in his atheism towards the end, and that actually maybe he was privately coming around, and the evidence is super duper weak, right? So one of the pieces of evidence has to do with this guy. Let's do. I think I gave this to you second, Jake, but it's from earlier in the video. Do we have the clip?
Consider by analogy the concept of physical health.
Oh, sorry, it's the other one. My bad.
Now, it's often said that science cannot give us a foundation for morality and human values because science deals with facts, and facts and values seem to belong to different spheres. It's often thought that there's no description of the way the world is that can tell us how the world ought to be. But I think this is quite clearly untrue. But values are a certain kind of fact. Okay, they are facts about the well-being of conscious creatures. Why is it that we don't have ethical obligations toward rocks?
Why is it?
Why is it?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you. No. So in the book, Taunton mentions a conversation, with Hitchens. He actually mentions two that are relevant here. One where Hitchens said that he disagreed with Peter Singer, because he couldn't believe that a piglet had the same moral status as a human child. And another is when he said that he thought that Sam Harris's moral theory, which, as you see from that clip, is basically just it's utilitarianism, that he didn't agree with that. That he thought that wasn't really sufficient. That wasn't a convincing moral theory.
Wait. So the idea is that if you're not a utilitarian, your morals must come from some sort of divine command, God-related thing.
Yes.
Well, that seems obviously true.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, by the law of disjunctive syllogism, one or the other, not one, therefore the other. So what are you gonna do there? Although I've clearly been screwing up because I have been telling my ethics students about all these other theories that aren't utilitarian and have nothing to do with God. So, oops.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really weird thing. That's you can't really be an atheist if you're a utilitarian, because if you're not a utilitarian, because those are the choices, right? It's divine commands or utilitarianism. Whereas,
and here my students are, do we have to learn any more theories? And I'm like, no, because we got to learn all these theories about God, because you might not want to be a utilitarian. So let's talk about God some more. I mean, we do cover in some of my ethics classes. I don't do it anymore, but we have covered divine command theory in the past, which does have to do with God.
Sure.
That's the only one.
Yeah.
And yes, I see what y'all are over there. Yes, Cowboys fans are born, not made. As a child, sat in front of the TV every Sunday or Monday night with my parents and my grandparents, and we watched the Cowboys. So yeah, I see y'all. I see y'all.
So the
Rock Lives Matter.
Yeah. So you might think, so of course, you might spend a day in ethics class talking about divine command theory. Probably most of that day is spent talking about the Euthyphro dilemma. Although this is pre October 2021 when the Euthyphro dilemma was solved.
Right.
No
point in talking about it anymore.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk has the decisive solution, which is both.
And you should watch that song, the video with the song. Did you tell them about the song? You should tell them about the song.
Yeah.
Ryan Lake is in the video for the song.
Hannah Hoffman Music is the YouTube channel. We actually did on a previous episode show a little bit of that song, and then told people to go give her the views, instead of watching the whole thing here. But yeah, it seems like besides thinking that divine commands are, the foundation of morality, and being a utilitarian, just saying whatever maximizes happiness and minimizes suffering is the right thing no matter what. You might think there's also
Has he never heard of Kant? For real? Has he never heard of Aristotle? I think it's entirely possible that Larry Taunton has not heard of Kant or Aristotle, or at least has not heard about them in enough detail to know what their ethical views were. But I'm also interested in Sam Harris's reason for being a utilitarian, because of course Sam Harris, credit where credit is due. I did. No.
What are you even reacting to?
Person. No. We don't do that here. Smushy face dog.
Sam Harris can't be serious. Yeah. So to give credit where credit's due, and we do give Sam Harris a hard time on the show. We are going to continue to do so in the next few minutes. But and I have joked in the past that what I say a while ago that the immediate example of a really hardcore GTAA fan is a 29-year-old graduate student whose girlfriend is sick of hearing about how dumb Sam Harris is. To give credit to Sam Harris, he's not going to make an argument for utilitarianism quite as foolish as anything based on like what Larry Taunton is assuming, right? I mean, Sam Harris does know that there have been people who aren't, divine command assists or utilitarians who've existed. So he gives he gives a bunch of other arguments, and he thinks in some strange way that you can derive utilitarian morality from science. And this is very confusing. It's not obvious at all what the connection's supposed to be. We were talking about this a little bit last week. But since then, we have discovered a clip of Sam Harris explaining why it's not unreasonable to think that science can tell us what's morally right and wrong by considering an analogy.
Consider by analogy the concept of physical health. I mean, the concept of physical health is undefined, as we just heard from Michael Spector. It has changed over the years. When this statue was carved, the average life expectancy was probably 30. It's now around 80 in the developed world. There may come a time when we meddle with our genomes in such a way that not being able to run a marathon at age 200 will be considered a profound disability. People will send you donations when you're in that condition. Notice that the fact that the concept of health is open, genuinely open for revision, does not make it vacuous. Okay, the distinction between a healthy person and a dead one is about as clear and consequential as any we make in science.
All right. Thank you, Yoda 7104 for the super chat, and I'm sorry for misrepresenting you. But says he's 27 and COVID dating is rough. We also got one earlier about somebody saying that they're no longer 29 in grad school. I know there's a very diverse group of people who watch this show. That
I'm not in grad school, but I am 29.
So in any case,
and Jake, you're doing fantastic.
There you go.
I'll write your recommendation letter.
Yeah, there you go. Silver Harlow says you wouldn't like the consequences of starting comp puns on here.
What up, Silver?
So what do we think about that analogy? So I kind of referred to this last week, but in a way that was like it kind of
I think we referred to this last week.
Well, I think the particular sentence might have come out of my mouth, but sure, in our discussion last week, this was referred to, and we, or perhaps I, were too quick maybe in making the point, and I think it is worth slowing down and making it a little bit greater detail. So, as far as I can tell, Harris's point goes something like this, that health is a science, but health is normative, that where there's like value judgments about healthy and unhealthy, so there's really no so even though science is about facts, that doesn't mean that it's a separate sphere from values. So what do we think about this argument?
So health is health itself a science?
See, this is interesting because I was talking earlier today to Lee Phillips, and I think he had a good point about this, right? Which is, you could say, well, health is applied biology, but it's like applied to try to achieve a certain goal, right? That it's like engineering is applied physics, that kind of thing. But the point is that the goal of course, nobody denies that once you figured out what your goals are, what goals you care about, then like non-moral facts can help you figure out how to achieve those goals. Like that's completely uncontroversial, right? The David Hume, who was first person who's making a big deal of the fact value thing, certainly didn't deny that. Made many moral arguments that included factual premises.
I would think that the more you knew, the better you would be at achieving your goals.
Right.
Even if those goals were normative goals.
Yeah, exactly. So you might think, okay, so there's a certain normative health, there's a certain sense maybe in which health is, sure, we're applying biology to meet normative goals, or for that matter, like when Engels uses the phrase, scientific socialism, I don't think, he's suggesting that science somehow tells you
science
that you should want socialism. I think he's saying in that same sort of application sense, you can take what you learn from the social science in order to understand how capitalism works. Now you can get beyond it, whatever, and whatever you think about that, right? Like the science isn't coming in at the normative part, the what you should do part. It's coming in the how do you achieve it, right? So this is the point. Last week we mentioned
I was here last.
Yes, you were here, but not every individual sentence was one that you spoke.
Well, the good ones were.
For example, I wouldn't want anyone to say, remember when Ben and Jen said roll tide, Yeah,
the good sentences are spoken by me.
But when Kant to the groundwork for metaphysics of morals makes the point that the same medical knowledge that can, help a doctor save somebody might also help them to, kill them in a way that nobody would ever find out. The medical science, right? The actual like applied biology that you're using to try to achieve health is not going to tell you, the answer to that. Like it's not going to tell you which goals you should have.
Nope.
Just like, science, sure, science can tell us all sort, especially if we're being expansive about our use of the word science. We're including the social sciences.
Science.
Always say it that way. Can certainly tell us things about how to achieve moral goals, just the same way it can tell us how to achieve health goals, right? But that doesn't mean that it can tell you which goals you should care about. Like that you should, is it important that people are healthy enough for long enough that they can run marathons when they're 200 years old in the future, or should we not bother with that because resources that could be spent to try to extend life that long in the future could be, better spent on something else. Yes, definitely. When your dad says you still have your health, you can just, oh no, I disagree with the normative premise. I think that this is, and this gets us back to that tweet that we were talking about last time, and I think might be able to sort of more clearly shed light on what's wrong with it, right? So remember, this was it. Question for the fans of the is-ought impasse in ethics, by which he just means questions for people who think that there really is an is-ought gap, that you can't get your normative goals just from the non-moral facts. Why don't we have a similar problem with reasoning itself? Why aren't we tempted to worry, for example, the fact that A is bigger than B doesn't allow us to say that we ought to believe that A is bigger than B? And I spent probably way too much time thinking about what he's trying to say here.
Did you spend any time thinking about what he was trying to say?
Yes.
That's too much.
So as far as I can tell, the idea is something like this. You think about this little series of comic panels that Andy drew for us. So first panel, if you do such and such, you won't live a long life.
Question mark.
You should, or I guess it should be, shouldn't do such and such. So the point, I think, assuming that we we changed it. So the second one was shouldn't, right? Which would presumably be the inference that you're supposed to make. The jump from the first panel to the third panel, Harris seems to be saying this is fine, right? If you know that if you do such and such, you won't live a long life, then you can conclude that you should, that you shouldn't do that thing, that, that if you do it, you won't live a long life. Or, if you know that doing such and such means you will live a long life, then you should do that thing. But of course,
can you put me back on screen there? What will not facilitate you living a long life? Taking your wife to 7-Eleven on a date.
No, I think the chat
that will not facilitate.
I think the chat coalesced along the lines, along the view that was actually justified now that they knew about some of these sports preferences. In any case,
what if I don't want to live a long life?
Yeah,
isn't that my business? Who is that to say that that's right or wrong? Is that a moral issue?
Yeah, it's not moral. I think that Harris's idea is that health, you say such and such is healthy, such and such is unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Then, that's, I think he's taking that as a normative concept, or or at the very least, even if it's not normative, right? Like that.
I don't feel that it is, but that could just be me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not super invested in either answer to that question, right? I think probably usually when we say such and such is healthy or such and such is unhealthy, there's usually some kind of implication floating around that you have a reason to do the healthy ones or a reason not to do the unhealthy ones.
Yeah. I'm just not sure that that's a moral issue.
No, again, I don't think it's a moral issue, right? But I think it might be something like a concept of what like the sort of physical aspect of a flourishing life or something that that this is better, even if it's not morally better. It's like there's some respect in which it's better. But if you take it that way, yeah, the point still stands, right? That the premise one, such and such is healthy, conclusion, you should do such and such. Well, that seems like an okay inference, but that's just because we're leaving that question mark in between, right? Like, in other words, that there's an implied premise too, which is that you should do things that are healthy,
mm-hmm.
and you shouldn't do things that are unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so similarly, and yes, Andy points out he didn't actually draw this. My mistake. He adapted a pre-existing meme, but he says, go back to his tweet, right? So here's the first premise: object A is bigger than object B.
Question mark.
Here's the conclusion: you should believe that object A is bigger than object B. So, yeah, we do go from premise one to that conclusion, and there are various ways of nitpicking this, that about whether you always have to believe true things or whatever, but everybody would kind of understand what you meant if you say, yeah, why should you believe that one? Because it's true, right? But that's because that question mark, right? What we've got, that implied second premise is you should believe true stuff, and
which is not itself always true.
Yeah, right. So this is, we talked about this a little bit last week, that at the very least, I mean,
it provides a reason for believing, or for a reason why you should believe it, but there could also be overriding reasons.
Yeah, or even there are lots of true things you don't have evidence for. You might think if you're asserting that it's true, there's some implication, we could nitpick this forever. Certainly any version of you should believe true stuff that holds universally would probably have to have a whole bunch of caveats in it.
We're philosophers. We love caveats.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, because nobody's saying that you have an epistemic obligation to go
around. We're going to lawyer this to death.
Spend every minute of the day forming true beliefs about every single individual, blade of grass, in the backyard. But the idea that in some sense it's good to believe stuff that's true is relatively uncontroversial and relatively uninteresting. The same way, don't do stuff that'll shorten your life is a relatively uninteresting sort of norm of, behavior, whether it's exactly a moral one or not. But when you take the sort of moral examples, especially you think about the kinds of conclusions that Sam Harris derives from his utilitarian morality, like he'll say like, oh, taking time bomb case, you should clearly torture that guy. And it seems like now premise one is, torturing terrorism suspects to get them to tell us where the bombs are will prevent more suffering than it causes.
Question mark.
Conclusion is we should torture terrorism suspects to get them to tell us where the bombs are. And it seems to me that this is very importantly unlike the previous two examples, because, do things that are good for your health and, will make you live longer, try to believe true stuff and avoid believing false stuff. These are like relatively uncontroversial.
So torturing someone is going to help you live longer.
No. Yeah, but
I may have gotten mixed up.
What would go in the question mark, right? What would go in the implied second premise here would be, it's always right to do things that will prevent more suffering than they cause. And that's a lot more controversial and interesting than try to, pay attention.
But if you don't believe that, then divine command theory is your choice of ethical theory.
Yeah, that's what Larry Taunton thinks.
See how it all comes back around?
Yeah. Like if you're going to fill in the blank for that question mark, for the
I'm glad you let me read the question mark boxes. That was really fun.
What would go in those blanks for the health case and the believe true stuff case? Even with all the caveats that would have to go for believe true stuff to make that precisely accurate. Yeah. If you're an analytic philosopher and you want to lawyer this, granted, right? But,
Ben tells me that I love to lawyer stuff to death.
I do, because she does.
I do.
But the general idea that you should try to swim towards truth and away from falsity is not super controversial. And the general idea that you should, pay attention to your health is not super controversial. Whereas absolutely anything that leads to better consequences is therefore morally better is, it's a lot more controversial. In fact, partially because of cases like this. All right. We are going to go to the post game for patrons. We're starting a little late tonight. So we're going to have Ethan Hirschenfeld, who is an actor. Has been in a bunch of shows you probably watched. He is also a stand-up comedian. And also, of course, if you want,
he's not going to be as funny as me, though.
Sure. If you, for anybody here is a fan of the David Feldman show, Ethan is certainly a beloved character in the David Feldman extended universe. So that should be a very good time. We are actually going to talk about a little bit of stuff that overlaps with this stuff just a little bit. Ben Shapiro and William Lane Craig, our graphic designer, Andy, found a pretty amazing clip of them talking about morality and slavery in the Bible. They have some thoughts. So we're going to check those out with Ethan. Should be a very good time. Patrons do not, I think, have the link just yet, but they should have it within like 90 seconds of the main show ending. So we're going to be on the post game in like 2 minutes. I will see you there.
Roll Tide!
All right, this was the last philosophy segment. It was fun.
Team Snoopy forever.
Left is best.